Happy morning to all of you. May now request our Treasurer CA Pannaraj to come and occupy the dais. May now request our SARC Chairman CA Kota Srinivas to escort our guest Sri Krishnamurthy sir to the dais, please. Let's all rise for Institute's motto song, prayer.
Yaesha supteshu jagrati Yaesha supteshu jagrati Kamam 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 kamusho Pusho nirmimanaha nirmimanaha Tadeva shukram Tada brahma Tada brahma Tadevamritamuchyate Tasmin lokaha shataha Sarve tadunatyati kaschanatyati kaschan Etadvaita 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 etadvaita
BRICS, as we know, it's the conglomerate of the 5 countries put together who constitute the top 25 economies of the world, all 5 put together, and if we take only 4, it is in the top 10. The 5 countries put together represents the 40% of the world's population, and represents 3.6 billion people. And the next BRICS summit is going to happen on September 3rd, 4th and 5th in China, in Xiamen, where China is going to host it. And India definitely holds significant, has a significant role to play in BRICS, which was started in the year 2006 with only BRIC, and South Africa joined in 2010. And today we thought it will be appropriate to have, speak on the economics rather than where we talk more on academics and numbers. In fact, to one of the questions where the student was asked, where is the capital of India? The student said Swiss banks. Of course, things are changing now, and it's time all the money is put to all the developmental use to see that our country comes forward in all things. So I request our SRC chairman to now formally give his welcome address.
Good morning, members. On the dais, we have the first speaker of the day, Sri T.S. Krishnamurthy, former Chief Election Commissioner of India. I have my colleagues, the office bearers of SARC, the Secretary D.C. Jain, the Treasurer Pannaraj. In the audience, we have one more speaker from Mumbai, C.A. Shailesh Haribhakti sir. Then I have my colleague from the council, Hemavati, and all the members who have come here to attend this particular program. As our motto song says, Yeshu Supteshu Jagrati, it's time for all of us to get up once again, because as my secretary said, usually we talk about only income tax, sales tax, now maybe of course GST. We have somewhat forgotten this economics only in our, I think most of us have done this economics in intermediate, few people would have done in CPT. I'm not saying anybody from CPT here. So we would have long back studied this economics, and we have forgotten. We thought we will have an entire day session on economics. In fact, before assuming the office of chairmanship, I was just thinking that during the discussion, a thought came to me that why can't we have a program as I stand tall in BRICS, that is India stand tall in BRICS. Of course, that is what we announced the program also, I Stand Tall in BRICS. That is part of my action plan. If those of you who have gone through my action plan, there is one thing that we will do a program on I Stand Tall in BRICS. And today is the date. And this is the month we thought it's appropriate, the month of August, to have this particular program. But when once we contacted the people, especially Mr. Gurumurthy sir said, this I Stand Tall in BRICS is a generic statement. May not be true in all the aspects. I said a few aspects I is standing tall, but he said overall, if you say it may not be appropriate to say that I stand tall in BRICS. So we just changed this thing. India as an emerging power and its role in BRICS. But definitely at the end of the day, I would like to see I stand tall in BRICS. So to make India stand tall in BRICS, it will not happen within a day or two. It's a process, and each and every one of us should put our might to see that India will stand tall, not only in BRICS, among the entire world as such. Of course, as per the projected estimates, by 2030, India will be the top 3 economies in this world, joining USA and China. Of course, China is maybe it may be ahead of India, but still we can also give them a tough competition, or maybe we can go equal to China. One thing is we should stop using China products probably. So that will also help us to move ahead, surge ahead I should say. So whatever it be, let us put our this thing and see that we will move ahead, and maybe with the support of all the professionals. Definitely the professionals are very much required in this country, so that that economy can grow faster. Instead of 2030, we can even see that by 2025 only India can move forward. Keeping all these things in mind, we have just had designed this particular program. Today we have got 5 speakers. So the first speaker, Sri T.S. Krishnamurthy sir, will be talking about positioning India in the new economic order strategies. As I was telling, future is that of India, or Asia I should say, where we have 2 powerful economies, India and China. Then we have CAS as game changer in economic diversification and development, which will be dealt by CAS Gurumurthy sir. Then post lunch we have Sri Manishankar Iyer, the Honorable Member of Parliament, who is coming and addressing us on India, a developed nation, challenges in public governance. He will be talking on those aspects. Then CA Shailesh Haribhakti sir, who has come from Mumbai, he will be talking on future of India, what next. Then the last topic will be role of CAs in unorganized sector, case studies across India, Dr. P. Kanaga Sabapati, professor from Coimbatore. So we have planned and we have invited all the topmost economists and also chartered accountants to come and share their wide knowledge. I once again welcome each and every one of you. This is not, as Secretary said, of figures like it's not income tax or service tax or GST as such. It's macro level economics which we are discussing. I hope all of you will learn a lot from these learned speakers, and let me wish you a very, very entertaining and knowledgeable feast of economics at the end of the day. Please enjoy this, and you have an opportunity to meet and interact with these people. Kindly let it be an interactive session also. At the end of each session, we can have few questions and get it clarified. Thank you once again, and welcome you all for this particular program.
Thank you, sir. And probably to cut the long things short, we'll wind up the inauguration and straight away go to the first session. And I request our Treasurer CA Panaraj sir to formally introduce our resource person and speaker, Shri T.S. Krishnamurthy sir.
Good morning, everybody. It is my pleasure to introduce the great personality, Mr. T.S. Krishnamurthy. He is basically a master in economics with a law degree, and is a former Indian Revenue Service officer and was the Chief Election Commissioner of India between February 2004 and May 2005. His main assignment as CEC was to oversee the 2004 elections to the Lok Sabha. He was known for his integrity and polite yet firm fist with which he handled all sensitive assignments throughout his career. He had earlier served in the Election Commission of India as a commissioner since 2000 January. Krishnamurthy started his career as an IRS officer. He served the government at various levels, including as Secretary, Department of Company Affairs. He was the first Indian Revenue Service officer to become Secretary to the Government of India, as well as the Chief Election Commission of India. As Secretary, Department of Company Affairs, he is credited with setting up of Investor Education and Protection Fund set up from unclaimed dividends of companies. Krishnamurthy started his career as a probationary officer at the Bank of India prior to nationalization at the age of 19. He joined the IRS in the batch of 1963, subsequent to which he was posted as Income Tax Officer in Madras. Having served number of ministries in New Delhi, including shipping and finance, he was deputed as Deputy General Manager with Hindustan Shipyard Limited in Visakhapatnam. One of the key jobs he has handled was the Chief Commissioner of Income Tax in Mumbai. He also served as an IMF advisor in Ethiopia and Georgia. As Chief Election Commissioner, he was an observer to the elections in Zimbabwe and the US presidential elections in 2004. In 2005, Krishnamurthy sir was appointed by the Supreme Court of India to conduct the elections of the Board of Control for Cricket in India in order to ensure free and fair polls amidst the different factions within the BCCI. With this, I present before you the stalwart personality, Mr. Krishnamurthy. Thank you.
Before I ask our speaker to speak on positioning India in the new economic order, a privilege for the chairman, and then we proceed to the session.
Well, members, India was a rich country, rich in tradition, culture, and also rich in wealth. This is what Lord Macaulay's address to the British Parliament on 2nd February 1835 was. I have travelled across the length and breadth of India, and I have not seen one person who is a beggar, who is a thief. Such wealth I have seen in this country, such high moral values, people of such caliber, that I do not think we would ever conquer this country unless we break the very backbone of this nation, which is our spiritual and cultural heritage, and therefore I propose that we replace our old and ancient education system, our culture, for if the India think that all that is foreign and English is good and greater their own, they will lose their self-esteem, their native culture, and they will become what we want them, a truly dominated nation. I think it's time, using English only, let us dominate the entire world as such. Sir, so over to you to lead us or take us through how to become again the superpower of this world, sir.
Very good morning to all of you, Mr. Gotha Srinivas, Mr. Jain, Mr. Pannaraj, distinguished members of the audience, an elite professional group. I was wondering how I have been invited to speak in this, because I am not a chartered accountant. Although I have been a student of economics, I can't claim myself to be an economist. But then I can only say I have abundant common sense to speak on the subject. Well, Mr. Srinivas mentioned about Lord Macaulay's observation to the British Parliament. There was one more observation made in the British Parliament by Robert Clive when he was impeached. He had looted so much of money from this country, and when he was asked to give his comment, he said, I am surprised at my own modesty for having looted only so much, because that was a rich country which he could have probably looted more. And this is very much in the records of the British Parliament, that I am surprised at my own moderation, or modesty, or not modesty, at the way that I could bring money from India. So such a rich country, such a culturally advanced country, why did it become so bad in the years that followed? We had invaders from abroad, and they could easily conquer this country except for a few pockets of resistance, because we were not united. That is the beginning of India's fall. Although we had different kingdoms and different provinces with different cultural differences. The country had a common bond, the cultural unity of this country. I don't know how many of you have read Nehru's Discovery of India. If you have not read it, it's a book which is worth reading, where you can have an access. In fact, I remember when I addressed some students of the Institute of Management in Delhi, I told one student asked me how to become patriotic. I said, one of the books you should read, many books are there, one of the books you should read is Discovery of India by Nehru. One of the finest books which has been written about the cultural legacy of this country, the scientific temperament of this country, the spiritual superiority of this country, and yet because of the disunity amongst us and because of the power, military power of the invaders, we could lose our identity so easily. The British came not as an invader, the British came as a trader, and the way in which they conducted themselves, they tasted the legacy of India. They realized there is so much of wealth available in this country, and thereby they started having political ambitions. And they found a easy prey, India being what it was at that time, they found it easy to conquer many portions of India gradually, and we became a servile nation. Now, the seminar is about how to make India a superpower. I was reading one of these books which I would recommend for people to read, Why Nations Fail, The Origins of Power, Prosperity and Poverty. If you look at the colonial countries, colonial ruled states rather, you take Africa, you take Asia, and you will find that in many places they became victims of foreign rule because of economic deficiency, because of educational deficiency. But this is the only country where, in spite of cultural superiority, we fell a prey to the foreign rule and we became a servile nation. Now, the question is whether we can become a superpower by strengthening our military power or the economic power. It's very easy for countries to increase its military power, of course with necessary resources. But in my opinion, many countries fail because they do not have adequate economic growth. And if economic growth is going to be affected by various factors, then your aspiration to become a superior military power cannot be achieved. When I went to Edinburgh some years back, about 4 or 5 years back, there was a big statue of Adam Smith and about his wealth of nations. One of the things that the economists in those days realized was not economics as a separate subject. The expression used by them was political economy. It is not economics. So economics had a very close nexus with politics. Unfortunately, when economics was taught in the colleges and the universities, they taught more about the economic theories and principles, but not so much the nexus between the political conditions and the economic conditions which are necessary for economic development. We got our independence in 1947. We are about 70 years old now since independence. But unfortunately, the economic growth of this country has not been as it ought to have been. If you take small countries, they have done so better, whether in those days, I'm talking about 70s and 80s, South Korea, Singapore and other countries. If they could do so well, how is it that a country with 70 years of political independence, how is it that we have not been able to banish poverty from this country? It's very unfortunate that poverty has been existing for so many years, and the unequal distribution of income and power income and wealth have resulted in, although have resulted in improvement in the economic conditions of the people, the downtrodden people have not really got the justice that they ought to have got. With the result that we got into a political system where the political parties started exploiting the poverty of this country, what they call normally as a vote bank. They found that it was very easy to get votes to become rulers by playing to the demands of the downtrodden people or the neglected sections of society. It's so easy. In fact, this is one of the things when I was inducted into the Election Commission, I noticed very perceptibly, it was evident all over, that the politics of this country got corrupted because of the poor economic conditions of the people. The political parties had no hesitation in exploiting these situations. Although the freedom fighters initially had laudable intentions, and some of them did excellent job in terms of drafting economic policies or policies for promoting or for alleviating poverty, we somewhere got misled. That's why I say that although we gave vote to all the people, what they call it as universal franchise, at a time when most of the countries in the Western world did not have universal franchise. And we thought this would be a good augury for a recovery of the nation, economic and political. I'm not blaming that universal franchise was wrong. What I would blame is the way in which our leaders conducted themselves, using this universal franchise in a manner that the economic growth was given a lopsided emphasis and focus. So, what is the answer to it today now? The political parties need to be tamed. Political parties need to be disciplined. Unfortunately, we don't have a law to regulate political parties in this country. And when an attempt is made by various organizations and individuals, even a draft law on political parties was prepared under the leadership of Justice M.N. Venkatachalaya. The government did not even have a look at it. I'm not blaming any particular government, please be understood. It is all political parties which have taken a kind of indifferent attitude to reforms in this area. So my core emphasis today is that if you want economic growth in this country, and if you want to achieve superpower status in the Committee of Nations, you need to look at some of the deficiencies we have, which have contributed to the backwardness of this country. You may claim yourself that you are having a 8% growth or 7.5% growth, economic growth, GDP growth and all that. Having seen the corridors of power, having seen almost every state in this country when I was in the Election Commission, and having been in the income tax department, seen the disparities in income and wealth, I can confidently say that the present style of promoting growth is not going to land you anywhere near economic superpower. You have got to change. In this connection, I would certainly say that the GST is a welcome measure in the sense that at least some kind of rational change has been brought out, although I may have different views on the GST rates and all that. That is not the point that I am going to make today. The point is we need to get ourselves properly shaped to meet the challenges of the time. China is certainly a rival in our competition for growth and in our competition for importance in the world of nations. And China is able to achieve it because of its political philosophy. I'm not saying that political philosophy is desirable, but that is what has brought them to this level. Discipline has been the control, concentration of power in such a manner that there is no resistance. All this have helped them in achieving this position. Now when we come to India, The situation is we adopted the democratic pattern of society, and somehow or other we brought also the socialistic ideas to bring about alleviation of poverty. Did we achieve it? Unfortunately not. The blame is not to be on the ideology or philosophy behind it. In 1991, when again I was very much associated with the budgets of 91, 92 and 93 in Delhi in Finance Ministry, we realized that all controls and all political interferences have not taken us far into a state of economic growth that ought to have been there. After 70 years, we are still talking about, I mean, at one stage, of course, we had a economic growth of 3% and 4% and very derisively called as Hindu growth. I don't think Hindu economic growth ever spoke about having a 3% growth, but anyhow, that is the way politicians conduct themselves. But the point is, have we given enough emphasis to ensure that the economic growth has to be in a manner that it is balanced? Have we given focus in such a manner that the policies are tuned for promoting the equality in income and wealth? Certainly not. Lobbies worked and political parties were willing to go along. And political parties had their own vested interests. Today, actually, in the afternoon, I am going to Bombay for a book launch function. One of my friends who was in the Times of India group, he has written a book called My Tryst with Corporates. This book is being launched today in the evening. And there, I went through his book because he was one of my very close friends for the past 30, 40 years. He was a company secretary who later on became general manager and director of the Times of India group. Now, if you read the book, you'll find that how companies behaved themselves, how companies had access to political power, how the corporates were functioning in a manner that they had only been looking after their own interests. The political dispensation, even though they had sworn themselves to a democratic pattern of society, I mean socialistic pattern of society, I found that the corporate law, corporate administration, everything was tuned in a very skewed manner, and you find lopsided development in this country. Some states were doing very well and some states were doing very badly, and some of the states were struggling to exist. Now, if laws, economic laws of this country are properly administered, we could have tackled the problem of poverty in a much better manner. Unfortunately, the persons who are guilty of this are politicians and to some extent bureaucrats as well, of which I was a part. I have to admit that. But the difficulty arises that in a large democracy with controls that existed earlier, we realized that it was not going to take us any far, particularly in view of the developments all over the world. So in 91, 92 and 93 budgets, we came out of the shackles of socialism and we came into a partly free market society. The free market again is not paragon of virtue. You have many characters, many patrons of free market indulging in corrupt practices, and the company administrations became very, very controversial. I have been associated with a number of companies, particularly vanishing companies. We found that how people were exploited by some unethical, unscrupulous businessmen. Now, I have to partly refer to the role of the chartered accountants in this area. Well, I have great respect for the profession, and this is the only profession where merit gets proper recognition, in the sense that there is no, anybody can appear for this examination, anybody can distinguish itself. But then the profession itself came into tremendous stress, and you will find in many cases, while we had distinguished persons like your founder, Mr. Kapadia, and number of persons, of course, I know them personally, and they did so well. But somewhere, like our democracy, it got derailed somewhere. Some of the professionals, whether it is chartered accountants or cost accountants or company secretaries, somehow they realized their loyalty was more to the company to which they were working than to the nation to which they were supposed to be. But then there are practical problems. I don't deny it. Even as a civil servant, I've had practical problems. I had to fight with my ministers. I had to fight with so many people. Sometimes, well, I have written a book on that, how my challenges and my dilemmas in civil service. But professions are very important to be on professional lines. And I'm glad in the last few years, all the institutes, the 3 institutes have done very well, and they are giving a lot of emphasis on training and ethical values and so on. Now, you have a tremendous responsibility to ensure that unethical practices in company law administration are nipped in the bud. You look at I'm a chairman of a few companies, and I'm on the board of a few companies, including one asset reconstruction company. Look at the way in which the banks have functioned. Now, you can always say that the banks did come under the influence of political parties, and most of the, or if not most, at least some of the NPAs are attributable to political interference and so on. Now, is that a sufficient explanation for the crisis in the banking industry? And one more thing, in asset reconstruction company with which I was associated until recently, only a month back I left the organization, we found that at least 60 to 70% of NPAs could be nursed back and we could make profit out of it. In fact, this particular company, right from year 1, we started making profit in acquiring NPAs and then nursing them back. So what was the lesson that we learned? That NPAs were created for various reasons, but they were allowed to languish without any proper economic policy to deal with them. Now, some of the banks did not have the freedom to proceed against NPAs, and some of the banks started increasing the NPAs because of various reasons, including political interference. Now, could the chartered accountants played a better role than this? In my opinion, yes, they should have. In fact, particularly the government development financial institutions, which were supposed to have encouraged industries to grow. It was found, in fact, the book that is being launched today in Bombay, it was found that they did not behave like development banks, and their interference in the working of the institutions was so adverse, and the government's interference in the working of these companies was so adverse that many companies development institutes ended up with bad loans. Now, of course, hue and cry is being raised now how to deal with this and how do we allow this to continue and so on. A lot of shareholders in companies have suffered because of our attitude to deal with these non-performing assets. When I was, Mr. Gurumurthy and Mr. Narayan Swami have already come, and well, there is an indefatigable fighter now that we are getting him in to fight the anomalies in our economic administration. So as I mentioned, that the non-performing assets clearly indicate how political interference and bureaucratic interference dealt with these issues of development in a very cursory manner, as a result of which we are in a terrible mess. I was just mentioning, Mr. Gurumurthy, that most of the NPAs now acquired by the asset reconstruction companies, we are able to deal with them and we are able to make profit out of it. It is because of cursed indifference on the part of both the government and the banking institutions that NPAs have been allowed to grow in a manner that have affected substantially the economic growth of this country. Now, I'll turn, having dealt with the economic aspects of it, I'll turn a little bit to the political aspect of our achievement or failure. As I mentioned, the political parties found politics and economics a source of immense income. It has become a business. It will be surprised to know that more than 1,000 political parties exist in this country. Why? How many of them really fight for electoral battles, or how many of them are concerned with the economic growth or political achievement in this country? Hardly about 50 political parties are actively involved in the electoral battle. Or maybe you can put it as 70. The remaining numbers, they're all lobbying institutions. They lobby for one particular group or other, with the result that the economic policies get distorted. One area where I have been fighting even as an election commissioner was the area of funding of the political parties. Although changes have taken place, some new measures have been brought, I am not satisfied with the changes that have been brought about. Whether it is bearer bonds for donations or reducing the amount from 20,000 to 2,000 for cash donations or anonymous donations, they are not enough. The stage has come when political parties are not going to behave in a fair and ethical manner. They are so much used to the misuse of power that they will still exploit these amendments. So it is necessary to find some other alternative to see that political parties function more responsibly and more effectively. And there is no problem about being paid, the members of parliament or legislatures being paid very well. Let them be paid very well. But they should not be allowed to interfere in the administration of the country. This is where we have been having problems. Well, I had a situation, as some of you may know, that I had to work with a minister with whom I was almost fighting every day. And he took away my powers as secretary, and I was given the power of a joint secretary. Of course, I didn't go and grumble about it. But we had to bring about a lot of changes in company law. A professional group had submitted reform proposals for company law. And when it was sent to the standing committee of the parliament, I went and called on the chairman of the standing committee of the parliament for expediting this particular new company law bill. I don't know how many of you are aware that from 600 and odd provisions, that particular bill, I think if I'm not mistaken, it is 1998 that we introduced that bill in the Rajya Sabha, thinking that it will not lapse. And I went and called on the chairman of the Parliament Committee to expedite the clearance of this bill so that it could be moved. The chairman, I don't want to mention the name because he's still active, he mentioned how many of the members of the parliament really take interest in company law amendments. Well, I think before that I must mention another interesting anecdote. When the new company law bill was taken to the cabinet, it was cleared in 2 minutes. I was surprised in the cabinet because I was sitting there in the meeting. Only one question was asked by the members of one of the members of the cabinet, saying that why have you made the age of retirement for directors as 70? Actually, we had suggested 65, we made it 70 when the draft bill was prepared. Make it 75. That was the only change that took place, and the company law provisions of 400 and odd provisions were cleared in 2 minutes. I was surprised. My minister said, your bill is cleared, you can go. So this is the attitude of politicians to economic changes. And it is therefore necessary to bring about substantial political reforms to bring good candidates in the field of government, not only in the civil service but also in the political leadership. Most of the political parties are not interested in the reforms that we have been suggesting. One major reform, as I said, is the need for a separate law to regulate and monitor the political parties. The second reform is about the funding of the political parties. My personal view is slightly different. Of course, I have given expression to it on many occasions. I have said there should be a national election fund to which all the all the corporates can give money directly, get 100% tax exemption, and that money could be used for state funding of the elections. A poor man should have the confidence to come and contest the elections. Today, even an ordinary middle class person will not be able to succeed in any election unless he is able to spend more money. So if you can bring about a proper state funding of elections with suitable incentives and controls, I am sure that the quality of political democracy in this country can be improved substantially. Now the last point that I will make, I think I am supposed to finish by about 10:45, 10:50. No, I think I have to leave to Bombay, as I said. So I will finish it by 10:50 or 10:55 and take 2 or 3 questions. Another point that I would like to make is the economic policies as they are drafted. They are not giving any emphasis for innovations or for merits. In fact, as I mentioned in this book, one of the points that he has made is this book, as I mentioned, Though Nations Fail, he says, their compelling and elegantly argued new theory reveals that to prosper, citizens need inclusive institutions which create virtuous circles of innovation, economic expansion, and more widely held wealth. So our economic policies have to be so designed that we recognize talents, we recognize creativity. Now, you can always say that we have some of the excellent technical institutions where talents are promoted, but you do not know how many of the talents, so nursed, they are not available for this country. And secondly, so many talented people are not even allowed to go and proceed further because of various deficiencies in our educational system. They are not allowed to proceed further. They are not allowed to excel themselves. So when the policies, particularly the educational policy, where reform proposals have been submitted by one committee, we seem to think that there is a need for another committee. A new committee has been again set up to bring about changes. If you are going to waste our time in too much of this thinking exercise rather than in implementing exercise, our road to achieve economic strength or military superior power will certainly get delayed. And the nations are watching all over the world. And if we are going to fail, I can tell you that, if we are going to fail either as a democracy or as an economic power, it is going to be a death knell for many small nations, because they are all watching very anxiously the policies that we adopt, the policies that we are implementing. And while perceptible improvements have taken place in public administration in this country in the last few years, but that is not adequate. A country of such vast size, it is necessary to decentralize power. This is one of the things that which need to be stressed, because you cannot administer this country either from the state capital or central capital or union capital. You have got to delegate more and more powers to the local institutions. The local institutions need to be strengthened, whether it is a municipality or a corporation or a panchayat. If we can strengthen in a manner that some of the policies are implemented without any problem, and if they can achieve a corruption-free society, because ultimately the problem that you face in the nation's economic growth is corruption. This corruption gets intensified because of centralized powers, and centralized power is not at all desirable. And one of the things, as I mentioned, why nations fail. Nations fail because centralized institutions, centralized power, centralized control. So it is necessary to immediately give serious thought to delegate powers to various lower level institutions. If democracy has survived in some of the Western nations, it's mainly because they have been empowered to deal with local problems without any difficulty. One of the things that I'll mention before I close is what Edmund Burke mentioned to the voters of Bristol when he said that you elect such people who will represent your local interest. But when there is a conflict between national interest and local interest, elect such people who will represent the national interest and not local interest. But we have landed in a situation, we do not have legislators who neither have, we do not have legislators who have national interest or even local interest. They have their personal interest or community interest. And if we can get rid of this kind of leadership, and if we can bring new leaders, the decentralization of powers, and bring about changes so that the rule of law is respected. Ultimately, the strength of a democracy, the strength of the nation depends upon the respect you give for the rule of law. And it's unfortunate that in this country, the rule of law has not been given the importance that it deserved. And that is the reason we are in a state of mess. And I do hope that with the changes that are taking place in the last few years, there will be some improvement to claim some kind of a economic superpower. You cannot achieve military power and be a superpower. I can tell you that, because if you read the history of nations, military power is not the answer to achieve success in the country or in the world. Whether you read glimpses of world history or Toynbee's study of history and so on, you'll realize that power ultimately depends upon the economic power. And that has to be achieved by a very rational, but at the same time, a humane approach. And I do hope that in the years to come, India will rise to the occasion. Thank you very much. I'm willing to answer a few questions.
Yeah, the floor is open for few questions if we can take.
Thank you very much, sir. You're mentioning passing of any bill or an act in the parliament to regulate the politics would be a difficult job. At the same time, is it possible that under the framework of the acts which are being controlled or administered by the Election Commission office, to kind of form of political governance standards institute side of thing, wherein every politician after getting elected is compelled to undergo a course of say 2 to 3 months, and that should be including teaching economics, things like that, and how should they should behave as far as the interests of the public are concerned. Number one. Number two, is it not possible to kind of design a metric system whereby, like as we are having control over the expenditures and all, we'll have a metrics-driven system kind of thing, wherein the chief of the political party and individual politicians who are being elected are given a kind of goals and targets in relation to the economic interests of the state, and that is being reviewed and also being regularly published in the website, so that people will have a kind of glimpse and could have some interest about they would be able to evaluate their politicians.
Yeah.
Thank you.
First, you mentioned about training the politicians. Let me clarify that the Election Commission is charged only with the responsibility of conducting elections. They have to operate within the framework of the Constitution of India and the Representation of People's Act. While I agree that there can be a developmental aspect where we can do some help in promoting the political consciousness of elected representatives and so on, this job is done by the Institute of Parliamentary Studies, which they do organize periodical courses for the legislators, where the Election Commission representatives also go and address them. That is very regularly it is being done. But mere training is only one side of the story. The monitoring of the politicians has to be done both by the political parties and the people of this country. Now, you mentioned about whether goals and targets can be set. These are not going to really help. In fact, I would say whether we can make an individual candidate come forward and give some kind of a framework of how he is going to function at the time of the elections. But prescribing a progress report and watching them is not going to be easy. Although it may be theoretically desirable, it may be difficult to practically implement it. But one suggestion which has been made by many people and in other countries is the recall of the representatives. Suppose the term of the legislature is 5 years, and if after 2.5 years, which means half the tenure is over, if there are legislators who have not performed well, in my opinion, there can be a scheme of recall. Again, in a big democracy like that, it's not going to be easy, but at least the threat of a recall may make some political representatives behave better. But the recall has to be for a very well-defined objective, like economic misdemeanor or moral failure or some kind of a mistakes he had done in his moral life. Some of the specified items, but serious offences can be stipulated for a recall of the legislator. That can certainly improve the standards of legislators in the parliament.
My name is Raghavindra Guru. I work on yoga and taxation for past 8 years full time. I have given my idea to G20 research group. They acknowledged it. Institute of Chartered Accountants of India has also acknowledged my work, apart from IMF Tax Research Unit. When it comes to BRICS, I find that most of the research work has been routed through Observer Research Foundation. Is there any specific contact you can help me with so that I can take forward my yoga and taxation and yoga and banking work forward?
Well, I do not have any direct contact as far as BRICS is concerned, but I can certainly put you on to the concerned person in the Ministry of External Affairs. Maybe he'll be able to help you, or in the Economic Affairs Department. But maybe you can, Mr. Kamath is the chairman of the bank, Development Bank.
BRICS, NDB BRICS.
Yeah. Maybe I can provide access to him if you want.
The chief of NIPFP, Vijay Kelkar, read my work and he suggested to his colleague, and it takes long time to move work.
You've got a remarkable person here who will be able to help you.
I've been struggling to talk to him for past 3 years.
You get in touch with him. Don't allow him to go unless he gives you the contact. And he is member of your profession.
Yeah,
he's able to help.
He's well versed in yoga and tax policy also. So he can definitely help me. Okay, sir.
Thank you. No. He's asking.
He has to leave.
I'll take one more. Yeah.
He has to leave.
Oh, sorry. You give me, what is the subject, you tell me, I'll answer in one sentence. No, in fact, the election commission can be made into a regulatory authority with certain powers. It can be made, provided it is armed with certain legislative support. For example, the moral code of conduct that we implement, that has no legislative strength. So we have suggested, the commission has suggested, and I personally suggested some changes in this regard. But there is one caveat I would like to say: regulators sometimes misbehave, and you find it very difficult to deal with them. I have personal experience with some of the regulators, and I can tell you that they are more stumbling blocks than for development. They don't realize the importance of development aspect. So don't have too many regulations. You have broad regulations, and it is necessary for them to bring in line with the regulations. And as far as possible, allow freedom, for particularly in the field of industry. And it is unfortunate that many of our regulators, including the company law matters, sometimes stand as a stumbling block. I think I'll say thank you very much. I have to go catch a flight.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for sharing your thoughts and sharing us the expectations what we need. I now request CA Hemavati, a Regional Council member, to hand over a small memento as a token of our love and affection to the speaker, CA Sri Krishnamurthy, sir.
Thank you. Sorry, I'll have to leave. Initial thought you are going to have more explosive ideas from people like Mr. Guru.
So opening batsman. So by thanking the opening batsman, Sri T.S. Krishnamurthy, now I invite Sri C.A. S. Gurumurthy sir, the economist and the chartered accountant, onto the dais. As I said in the inaugural address, I said that the name of the conference should be I Stand Tall in BRICS. Mr. Gurumurthy sir said changed it as India as an emerging global power and its role in BRICS according to the situations existing today. And he'll be speaking on CAs as game changer in economic diversification and development. On behalf of everybody, I welcome him. Of course, he needs no introduction because he's a very, very regular speaker and a well-known personality among all of us here. But there are few people who have come from different places and also the upcoming students. So I request our treasurer to introduce him very briefly, and so that leave it to the speaker for the next 45 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll definitely not rob the timing of Gurumurthy sir. See, Gurumurthy has had his schooling locally in Chennai and pursued his higher education at Ramakrishna Mission Vivekananda College in Chennai. He was drawn towards the RSS during his college days and continues his affiliation with the organization, maintaining an active role in many of their initiatives. Gurumurthy sir's articles are highly regarded in certain circles of Indian political thought and are more generally pursued to be well researched and based on extensive study. Gurumurthy's articles made revelatory claims concerning many of the financial irregularities that the Reliance group of companies has been widely accused of having committed. Gurumurthy is known to have played a pivotal mediating role to resolve the feuds in the corporate circles. He was the convener of the task force to assess black money illegally deposited by Indian politicians and businessmen in foreign banks. This is the brief introduction of Gurumurthy sir. Sir, welcome you, sir. Thank you.
Good morning to all. CAs as game changer in economic diversification and development is a very, very comprehensive topic which may take even a day. But this is not the topic on which I wanted to talk, but this is the topic on which I have been asked to talk. There is a difference between what I wanted to talk and what I have been asked to talk. First of all, I must congratulate you for having taken up a macro issue for discussions. Because the CA profession is a very focused profession. Its idea is to make money. Let us be very clear about it. But I feel some of the best minds of the country being gathered by a process of selection and examination which is purely meritorious, and to employ them only to make money is a national disservice. But there is nothing which motivates a chartered accountant to do anything other than being successful in profession. I have been seeing it for the last 4 decades that the chartered accountants have hardly taken interest outside the professional circuit. So when I see some of these topics about the nation, development at a geopolitical level, I'm happy that the chartered accountants seem to be opening their mind to trans-professional areas, which is very important considering the fact that we attract some of the best talents in the country today. And we have gathered a vast army of highly talented people, but underemploy them in the process of development of the country itself. This is a matter for deep introspection and action. But I don't think as we are structured today as an institute or as a profession, we are in a position to provide leadership to this huge army of competent people. But some of these programs may open their mind, at least as individuals they can pursue things, as some of us happen to do. Nani Palkiwala was undoubtedly a brilliant lawyer, but it would be a sin to reduce him to be a lawyer. That's how a chartered accountant must be. We are fundamentally professionals, but we should not be reduced to being simply a professional. That should be our goal. At least a cream of our profession should be driven to think like this, and programs like this may help. You know, the idea of development, what economic diversification and development, of course a very difficult subject. What again? There is a diversified approach to economic development, which is not known to economists. I can tell you, because that's a field in which I regularly have dialogue and debate and disputes with them. Most of the economists do not know the society of India. In fact, one of my friends asked me when Raghuram Rajan became the governor of the Reserve Bank of India, what he should do. I said he should do what Mahatma Gandhi did. And Mahatma Gandhi came back to India. He went to Gokhale, Gopal Krishna Gokhale, and asked him what he should do. I am telling you, this is equally good for our profession. Gopal Krishna Gokhale told him, you have been so far away from India. India has changed a lot in the meanwhile. So I want you to take a travel across the country to understand how far India has changed from where he saw India. In fact, he booked all his travels and asked him to travel and told him, don't utter one word about anything that you see till you reach a conclusion after you complete the travel. You know, Mahatma Gandhi never uttered one word throughout the entire course of travel of 1 year. And you know what he did in that 1 year? He first changed his dress. He communicated with India through a body language without which Mahatma Gandhi could never have been Mahatma Gandhi, because that is how he understood the society of India. No communication model could have been more powerful, more intense, more profound, more penetrating than his own dress. This is what experiencing a society does, because I underwent this very experience. I have been a corporate consultant. I was much sought after corporate consultants by many leading corporates. In their family disputes, in aligning the business and their family, and very acute taxation issues. When the tsunami of globalization struck India, I found none of these businessmen had any idea as to how to handle this new animal. They were all stunned, shaken. It was at that time I remembered Mahatma Gandhi being advised by Gokhale to take a travel across the country, and I did the same thing. I took a travel across the country. Of course, my travel was not social, it was more business, industrial. And I went to those industrial centers which have come up, practically without government help. Ludhiana, Batala, Rajkot, Jamnagar, Morbi, like that. I nearly visited about, in the first lap of 4 years, I visited about 42 industrial clusters. And there are about 2,800 industrial clusters in India, according to UNIDO, of which about 400 are very, very prominent, and they almost constitute 60% of the manufacturing and as much of the exports of India. And none of them is situated in any city. They are all outside cities. So when I took a travel across the country, in each of these clusters, I used to spend 3-4 days, and there were some colleagues of mine who used to travel with me, and one of them is going to address you tomorrow, Professor Kanak Sabapati. He has written a book of our experiences. our idea about India completely changed. What we read about India, what the economists know about India, what the policymakers speak about India, what the politicians know about India has nothing to do with the India that unveiled before us because of the travel. We found there is a relationship between caste and entrepreneurship. Most of these industrial clusters are driven by caste combinations. And once a community enters business, it wants to have good relationship with other communities. But once a community enters politics, it wants to have conflicting relationship with other communities. We found that there is alignment between business and community, and there is non-alignment between politics and communities. So a completely new idea came up before us, and this is totally contradictory to the modern economic theory of development, because most of us do not go through acutely what is the modern economic theory of development. See, economic theories are founded on economically rational human being, individual. The individualist societies, more particularly the Anglo-Saxon societies, have generated these modern economic theories. In fact, if any of you had studied sociology, I don't think I will burden the chartered accountants with lessons on sociology and anthropology. But this is rooted in what is known as Western anthropological modernity. What we see as modernity is actually Western anthropological modernity, which means the breakup of societies, communities, and even families to produce modernity. Modernity is individualist, and a person is supposed to be towering over not only the society and community but also the family. This is the idea of economically rational man, which came out of what is known as the Weberian theory. If anybody could be called as the father of modern Western civilization, it is Max Weber. He theorized that 100 years back, somewhere in 1897, he theorized that the entire world will become individualist, and all the societies and communities, all these interrelationship you are saying will also go. We will find a totally contract-based society emerging, and contract-based society will be the foundation of the new economic model. And you know, the efficient market theory, the efficient market hypothesis, all this is founded on what is known as methodological individualism, which is founded in the Western anthropological modernity, with which we have nothing to do. We can never live that life. And what that life will produce and what it has produced, I will tell you. 55% of the first marriages end in divorce, 65% of the second marriages end in divorce, 74% of the third marriages end in divorce, 41% of the babies are born outside wedlock, and half of them for school-going children in America. This is 51% in England. An individualist society produces this consequence, as a result of which the families have collapsed and the function of the families have been taken over by the state. With the result, the social security and health security obligations of the American government, if it is discounted to the present day value, it is $104 trillion. It is an unfunded obligation. A chartered accountant will understand what is an unfunded obligation. This is an obligation which is real, against which you don't have even $1. This is the work of Western anthropological modernity, where there is no relationship between father and son, brother and brother, sister and brother. There is no relationship between even husband and wife, and that is why the whole families have collapsed and fallen at the feet of the government, completely burdening the government. Families have been nationalized. This is the output of the modern economic theory. We must understand this. And that is what is being experimented everywhere in the world, and the entire world, particularly Asians, are resisting this model. And that is what I want to talk to you, how even the government of India has come round to accept this view. The United Nations has come round to accept this view. How the United Nations, which first expounded this view, has gone back upon it. Nothing is being discussed in India. and I want to show to you how Max Weber, who theorized that it is only Western individual. Of course, Max Weber did not want it. He said West will fatigue and it will go to religion and it will accept limited dictatorship. This is what he has theorized. West may be moving towards it in the next 100 years. But Max Weber, after theorizing that the West will go into this individualist mode, which will result in these economic theories, he wrote a book, Religion of Hinduism and Buddhism. In that book, he said, there are two societies which will never come up economically, and that is India and China, because they follow a religion or two religions which believe in karma and rebirth. These two religions, because they believe in karma and rebirth and fate, they can never be individualist, they can never produce entrepreneurs, they can never produce business sentiments, and they will never be fitted into the modern market theories. The efficient market theory will not accept these two societies. This was Max Weber's conclusion in 1920. On this basis, many economists in India began saying, unless the society in India restructured and destroyed, you can never achieve economic development. One of them was Professor Raj Krishna, who in 1978 said that whatever policies we may follow, because he was asked the question, we are following the same policies as most of these East European countries, Russia, China, but we are not posting as much growth as these countries are posting. Why? He said we can have only Hindu rate of growth, whatever the policies we may follow. There is a structural weakness in India. India can never produce economic development unless it ceases to be quote unquote Hindu. You know, this was what was driving. Don't think this was something an economist expressed an offhand opinion. This was the declaration by the United Nations in 1951. I am going to read out a shocking quote to you, which the Princeton University said it is in utter arrogance. The United Nations and the West said this. I am going to read out what the United Nations said, because we all think of the superstructure without knowing what is actually operating on the ground. This is United Nations Department of Economic Affairs, Measures for the Development of Underdeveloped Countries, 1951. This became the Bible and the mandate for policy making in all the countries. What I am going to read out. There is a sense in which rapid progress is impossible without painful adjustments. Ancient philosophies have to be scrapped. Old social institutions have to disintegrate. Bonds of caste, creed and race have to burst, and large number of people who cannot keep up with progress have to have their expectations of a comfortable life frustrated. Very few communities are willing to pay the price for economic progress. Completely the Western experience being experimented on the rest. This was the mandate. In fact, quoting this, the Princeton University said, this is sheer arrogance of the West to tell the rest that you have to completely social engineer yourself, change yourself, give up your way of life, culture, philosophy if you want to develop. You know, this approach, which was both Max Weber and also Karl Marx, has been by research found to have impacted the most on Indian academia, Indian intellectualism, Indian policy making, Indian public discourse. This is how our economy was being run, our policies were being made. But you know, something dramatically changes in the year 1983. Paul Bayrock, a Belgian economist, was asked by the General Agreement on Trade and Tariff to track the economic growth model of the world between 1750 and 1900. And Paul Bayrock came out with an astounding finding that in the year 1750, if you mapped the development of the world, China was leading the world with 34% of world GDP, and India with 24.5%, and England and America put together 2%. And in 1900, the whole thing changes upside down. India and China crashed to 8%, India 1.8% and China 6.2%. And America and England zoom from 2% to 41%. This completely demolished Max Weber's theory that economic development is a preserve of individualist societies. And in 2001, Angus Madison confirmed it. After a 2000-year mapping of the world, he said for the first 1400 years, India was the leading economic engine of the world, China number 2, 1500 India and China equal, 1600 China overtook India, 1700 India overtook China, and 1900 both were overtaken by others. This is regarded as the most authentic economic history of the world, which is available on the net if you want to read. This was the work done under the auspices of Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, which is one of the most credible institutions in the world. It is available on the net, and that book, which is a magnum opus on world economic history for 2000 years, is known as World Economic History, a Millennial Perspective. This settled the view that India was an economic power for 1500 years. And of course there are other researchers. I don't want to burden you because I had made all this, compiled and put it in a lecture which I had delivered in IIT Bombay in 2010, which is available on the net. If you go to Google Guru Murthy Avenues IIT Bombay 2010, you will get that lecture, in which I had traced all this. As a result of which the IIT asked me to do a course for them. Every year I teach for 21 hours in IIT Bombay as to how the entire Indian economic development model is still functioning today. So when you see diversity, you have an approach, they said the whole world has to be in one uniform model. And you cannot have any other model. All the diversification that you are talking about is a very recent idea. I am surprised that the Institute of Chartered Accountants India has thought about aligning economic development and diversity, but you must also know how this came. You know, in the West, there are very powerful thinkers. Whatever you may say, I have very great disagreements with the West as to how it looks at the rest. But I am also very proud that I can acknowledge that there are very powerful thinkers in the West who can see what can happen in the next 25 years, at least in the economic and geopolitical sense of the term. So now see what happens afterwards. This, in the year 2005, the G20 nations met. The finance ministers and central bank governors of Reserve Bank met. Till 2005, and more particularly from 1991, there is only one model of development. It is fit-all model, hold-all model, universal model. Economic theories are universal. There is no exception to the operation of the economic theory, whether it is in China or Japan or India or England. This was the view that was being canvassed till 2005. All your hedge funds, your stock market, everybody functions on this basis that economic theories operate uniformly all over the world. Now you see, I am going to read out to you what the G20 nation leaders said in October 2005. We note that developmental approaches are evolving over time. You see how they are withdrawing from that position. And this needs to be updated as economic challenges unfold. We recognize that there is no uniform development approach that fits all countries. This is who? G20 nations. Every country should be able to choose the developmental approach and policies that best suits its specific characteristic. You know, not a single article has been written in any of the economic journals, newspapers in India referring to this. I don't think any think tank in India even thought about it. I don't think any economist, because if you think about it, then you will have to say what is our specific characteristic. You will have to do research. You can't do this carbon copying work. All the economic researches in India are carbon copies of what is produced in the West. Simple example I will tell you. In your economic textbook, have you ever heard the word family? If there is anything that is driving India in terms of consumption, in terms of savings, in terms of investment models, it is only the family. You know, our savings to GDP ratio, family savings was 19% in the year 1991. So Dr. Jagdish Bhagwati was invited by the then finance minister. He was asked, see, now we are in serious problems, please tell us how can we grow. He said, so long as your families are saving so much, you can never grow. You have to cut the family savings by half. And if you cut the family savings by half, it will turn into expenditure, then it will be consumption, then it will be sales, then production, then employment. Nobody can stop India if you make the families reduce their savings by half. And he put it in a 72-page paper which he wrote and gave to the government of India, in which for 3 pages he dealt with about the families in India. The families in India are backward, you know, they have no progressive outlook. The Indian women are so stingy, they don't want to spend. You have to make them spend. If you make the Indian women spend, then nobody can stop the growth of India. Can you think of a more foolish approach to Indian development? So we began following the advice given by them. Then we cut down the rates of import duty. He said, your goods are so bad, build the imported goods, build a huge mall. The women must be attracted to buy jewelry, buy textiles and all kinds of things. And the government of India began doing it. And we in the media got so much advertisement. You know, the media advertisement revenue jumped by 20 times between 1991 and 2001. And songs were written not in praise of God, but in praise of goods. And our women sang the songs also, but they did not buy the goods. As a result of which, the family savings to GDP ratio went up from 19% in 1991 to 29% in 2009. And the national savings went up from 23% to 37%. National investment went up from 24% to 40%, and that is what gave us the 10% growth rate. But the word family is absent in economic textbooks in India. So you can understand the divergence between economic theorizing and economic model which is functioning on the ground. So these fellows who were saying there is only one model and you have to scrap all your dirty lifestyle, you must be in tune with the West. In fact, the man who wrote that book, History of the End of History and the Lost Man, Francis Fukuyama, that was supposed to be the Bible of globalization. He said the West has finally won, and it is for the best for the rest to follow the West. This was the theory. And all of us were told, this is the direction in which you go, don't detract. In fact, when we went and argued, this is not the way, when I started campaigning, you know, my greatest advantage was that I felt it was wrong. And I went throughout the country traveling. I was abused. In Administrative Staff College of India in Hyderabad, when I was talking, one person stood up and said, persons like you must be shot dead because you are preventing the growth and development of India. This was the kind of objection I was facing from the English educated people of India, who are nothing except Englishmen themselves. Now this is what the G20 nations said in the year 2005. Now we see what the World Bank does. World Bank is the one which expounded the idea there is only one model. That's our model. That is their model. In May 2008, you see, all these fellows knew the crisis was coming. Even now they know we are sitting on a huge pile of bombs which can explode anytime. But if you say even what little activity is happening, that will collapse. So in 2008 May, the World Bank came to know that crisis is emerging. See what the World Bank said. In our work across the world, World Bank has learned the hard way that there is no one model that fits all. Again, till yesterday you were telling us, and all our policy makers were clapping you. This is what is happening in America, you do it here. This is what is happening in England, you do it here. I mean, this is what you were saying. It is only the Japanese, it is only the Chinese, it is the Koreans, it is the Taiwanese who are more intelligent because they did not know English. Advantage. English was the easiest medium to pump their ideas into India because the Japanese and Chinese and Taiwanese kept away from English, they could also keep away from the Western theorizing. It means taking the best, there is no one model that fits all. Development is all about transformation. It means taking the best ideas, testing them in new situations, and throwing away what does not work. It means above all having the ability to recognize that when we have failed, this is never an easy thing to do. Even more difficult for an organization like us, this is what they don't say that, like us to do, be it the government or the World Bank. They are saying what we have done so far is not correct. Have you heard this anywhere? You are also very intelligent people. We are illiterates. We are economic illiterates. And let us admit it, because that is the way to start. Now, United Nations first said you must destroy all your philosophies, there is only one model of development. In the year 2010, the Deputy Secretary General of United Nations said, development should be nationally driven, rejecting the one-size-fits-all approach. United Nations. Then in 2013, 12th June, United Nations General Assembly debate, all of you must go download and read it. That reflects our opinion. But that is not the opinion of your policymakers, your economists, your column writers, your intellectuals. But you will resonate with what the United Nations General Assembly debate says. The Secretary General said, no one-size-fits-all model as it does not take cultural settings into account. Culture and economics are supposed to be unaligned. Culture is supposed to prevent economic development. But now the culture and economic development are so aligned, unless you have culturally compatible policies, you cannot create economic development. Model is the new theory. Vital role of culture in development needs to be recognized. Have you ever heard an economist talking like this? This is the global thinking today. UNESCO view. No development or prosperity without culture. Power of the culture needs to be factored in. The whole world has taken a U-turn. But in India we follow the same thing, same model. All your future projections, all that you do in terms of